Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, Made You Book. My name's Gretchen and today I want to talk about a book called Wifedom by Anna Funder. Now, this book was brought to my attention a few months ago. I was really looking forward to getting to the book Julia by Sandra Newman, which is a retelling of George Orwell's 1984. And as I was kind of doing research for that, I ran across this other book by Anna Funder called Wifedom, and to me, it was such a fascinating premise because basically the book is about George Orwell's real life wife. Her name was Eileen, and she was kind of like Julia in Orwell's story. She was kind of a secondary character, and we know a lot about George Orwell. I think that if you're watching a BookTube channel, you are likely familiar with George Orwell and his works. And when you look at the biographies that are available for George Orwell, or even the nonfiction work that he did, you don't really hear a whole lot about his wife. And this book takes on rewriting, or not even necessarily rewriting, but digging out Eileen from all of Orwell's histories and bringing that to the forefront, because she was a major player in his life and we didn't really know a whole lot about her, whether that was on purpose, whether she was purposely written out of his narratives, or if it was just an oversight on his part. If I had to guess, after reading this book and having my eyes opened about a lot of things related to George Orwell, I would say that it was probably a conscious decision for him to remove her from some of those narratives. Now, the book is really interesting, not only for its content, but also the structure and the craft and form of the book. So it is considered nonfiction, but it is definitely narrative in nature. You are reading it and you feel like you could be reading a piece of fiction because the writing is very much like a novel, and it is very good writing. It's wonderful writing. And the other part that makes this book interesting is that the writer, Anna Funder, she basically took letters that were correspondence between Eileen and one of her friends, Nora, and she kind of started to dig in and really do her research and investigation into what was being said in those letters on the surface, but also what maybe those underlining things were. So not only is this considered narrative nonfiction, but it's also speculative in the sense that she does not necessarily know all of the motivations of Orwell or Eileen, but based on her research and based on the clues and other things that she was able to find when she started to research for the book, she was able to come up with her idea of what the narrative should be. So obviously this is touted as being nonfiction, but there are also some speculative elements to it as well, because obviously Anna was not side by side with Eileen, and Eileen has since passed and she just doesn't know what all of the motivations are. But based on some really strong research and clues, she was able to kind of piece some of the things together. So I found this to be extremely fascinating. It had so much going on in it, and I absolutely loved the way that the book was laid out, where we got little vignettes of letters and correspondence. We also learned a lot more, not only about Eileen, but of course, George Orwell. And the way that we had the information about George presented was through not only Eileen's letters and historical things that we know to be fact, but a lot of biographies have been written about George Orwell because he was such a prolific figure in the literary world that there were a lot of people that did the research for George as a person and a writer, and they put his biography out there. And one of the most amazing things about this book was the way that Anna was able to take what she knew about what was going on with Eileen compared to what was being said in the biographies, and she was able to really piece together things. She was able to uncover things that were never known. And I will be honest, as a fan of George Orwell's writing and his books, this book was a really tough read for me because it painted Orwell in a very negative light, and learning about how he treated his wife, and not only how he treated his wife, but how he treated other women. He was an extremely well-loved author in my mind, and I am not going to lie and say that my opinion of him has definitely been reduced by reading this book. Now, once again, having read his books before knowing anything about him, I am always going to love 1984. I'm always going to love Animal Farm. And what is funny is that one of the things that we learn is how present Eileen was in his writing. And she was not only an inspiration and encouraging him to write and being a good wife and standing by his side through thick and thin, in learning more about Eileen as a person and talking to other people that knew her, it becomes more and more evident that she definitely had a part to play in the writing of his books. And she actually played an extremely big part in some of those books. And for any of you that have, now I will admit I have not read the book, but I did watch the movie prior to knowing that this was based on a book, but it gave me super strong The Wife vibes by Megan Wolitzer, and I was fascinated by that story, or I should say I was fascinated by that movie. And it sets up the question, when we have artists, obviously we have artists that need their muses and they need their inspiration, but at what point in time do the muses and the inspirations actually guide us, and how much of them rubs off on the artist? And it was very interesting to learn about that. And the wife that kind of was in the background that we never hear about, that she's kind of scrubbed from all of his biographies and his stories, and we never hear about the women or the spouses or the family behind these great writers and artists, and how much they could potentially have contributed to the works that we love so much. So I was absolutely engrossed in this book. I read it in just over like a day and a half. I could not put it down. It was so fascinating. And I really loved this work because even though I ended up feeling kind of icky at the end of it because I learned so much more about Orwell, I am so glad that I read it because we have a very strong and powerful and wonderful woman that finally gets some semblance of her story told. And even if it is at the mercy of knocking Orwell down a peg or two in my mind as far as respect for him and even the work that he produced, because there's so much evidence that she was more involved with the creation of his work than previously known before. I just think it's wonderful that we have an opportunity now to read her story. And it always makes me think about how often this is happening and how many times other authors that we love so much have actually contributed to their work, and whether it is, you know, kind of that it takes a village mentality to write a good book, or is it really solely the ideas of that person? Are they being 100% creator in that instance, or are they using other people in their life to hone their craft? So I absolutely adored this. This is actually the second book that I read from the Women's Prize for Nonfiction long list, and I have 2 5-star reads. I never thought that I would be so invested in nonfiction. It's something that I have really enjoyed reading as of late, and I'm going to continue down that path. I believe that the next book that I'm going to read is All That She Carried from the long list, and I think that there are a handful of other ones that sound really interesting, and I am going to get to at some point in time regardless. I'm just waiting on some holds to come in from my library. But yeah, I love the fact that we now have a new literary award for nonfiction. And not only that, but it highlights women. And I'm just really excited about it. So were you aware of the Women's Prize for Nonfiction? Are you planning on reading any of those books? I'm really curious to know if anyone else has read this book, and if you did, whether or not you appreciated the liberties that Anna Funder took in kind of piecing Eileen's narrative together, and whether or not you maybe think of Orwell in a different light. Now, this is only if you liked Orwell to begin with or enjoyed his works. You may not like Orwell at all, and maybe reading a book like this just solidified your views of him. But I'm really curious to know if anybody else out there has a little bit of a tainted opinion of Orwell now that you have read this book and you really get into learning more about what a womanizer and what a horrible husband he has been portrayed to be. So yeah, and if there are any other books from the long list that you're interested in reading or you think that I should prioritize, please let me know. And until we read again, bye.